Went to see Echelon. Johnson Return. 2,089 acres. Ross Road. 545,000. I think the Badgetts have sold the house.
Badgett, who
You lived on Jefferson. She was member of the Catholic Church. Always walked her dog in the mornings and nights. Barney Badgett.
Hello? Your voice is sounding funny.
Yeah, something's wrong with your microphone. You sound kind of like it's like Mickey Mouse. It's completely not understandable.
Somewhere in Presbyterian Church. Yeah, just, okay, hang on to the dishes.
All right, do I still sound like a chipmunk?
No,
No.
you sound good.
Okay. We've accomplished something today. That's good. Okay. I don't know, maybe the chipmunk voice is something I should go for more often. Right.
Turn the whole light on for me, please.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Edwin Gaskin with Echelon Resources. As you already might have learned, I'm not the world's most prolific Zoom expert. So if there are technical issues, I apologize, but please give me feedback and I'll try to fix them. Got a couple of people on here, including my associates, Randy Cosby, Andy Beach. We also have several folks from the city here, including Councilman Siegler and City Manager Jim Halles. And I think I see Arnie on here somewhere. There's probably a couple other people I haven't recognized. I don't know that we have a formal agenda for this meeting. We wanted to have a dialogue about the concept that was recently introduced for the Spotswood parcel. We do have a PowerPoint we can run through, but we want to make sure our objective today is to make sure everybody can, ask all their questions, voice their comments or concerns. We likely will not have all the answers to all the questions, but we certainly would like to hear them and answer the ones that we can, and go off and research the ones that we can. Jim, do you have any particular way you wanted me to start this, or did you want me to just jump in, or?
Why don't you jump in, Edwin? It's important for them to see what you have to offer.
All right. Let me see if I can't get this going. All right, just share screen here. Okay, so as we discussed, this is regarding the Spotswood parcel. We recently presented to City Council on. This is at 350 Spotswood Drive. It's about 3.2 acres. It's right across from the historic cemetery. And in the, I guess that would be the northeast portion, you have the former rescue squad building that's currently being utilized by RARA and the community table. But for that, it's largely an open parcel, minimal trees, except for that northeast portion, not a lot of topography to contend with. What we've proposed is about 150 new units of new construction multifamily, new residential units. We plan to do surface parking. The parcel itself is quite small, so parking will be the limiting factor. Our goal is primarily to produce one bedroom and studio apartments with a smaller number of 2-bedroom apartments. Our goal is really to hold true to the targeted clientele that we've successfully served in other communities, and that's essentially area professionals and retirees. As part of the process, a goal would be to relocate both RARA and the community table. They have been engaged both directly by us and via the city, in the case of the community table, in terms of a discussion. We've offered $350,000 for the land as it sits today. In terms of what you might see at the end of the day, should this proposal be so fortunate to be approved and move forward, is really something akin to what you're seeing here, a 4-story structure, what they call in the industry stick built. The facade or the exterior view can be any number of things and materials. And this is typically something that's negotiated with the city as part of the design process. But in terms of scale, we're talking essentially about a 4-story structure. What we do as a team, we focus on redevelopment opportunities, both historic buildings and infill sites. By infill sites, I mean essentially vacant lots that are otherwise surrounded by development. We focus on these areas because they currently may not be the highest and best use. We do some commercial spaces, but primarily we focus on quality housing that offers opportunities for employers to have their employees living locally. And of course, those residents being local, support local businesses. We are owner developers. We're not what's called a merchant developer or a merchant contractor where we do it for somebody else. Whatever we build, we will continue to own and operate. That's supposed to give comfort because we're in a community for a long time. We eat our own cooking, so to speak. So we focus on doing quality development. We have partnered with a group out of Richmond called UrbanCore, which has done a lot of new construction over the last several years, and done some award-winning work and seem to be the right fit for this type of development. UrbanCore really focuses on a team approach, both in terms of the folks that they have, the planning that leads up to a project like this, and then the process to execute it. Being an owner developer, I know from experience for the last almost 20 years that the project's never any better than the quality of the field superintendent that's running it. So really having an excellent team that's able to execute a project is one of the big poles in the tent, so to speak, to make sure it works well. As we discussed in the city council meeting, why do we do what we do? Again, there's a lot of ways to make money in this diverse world. We like doing what we do because we think it makes a difference. It usually takes a negative and creates a positive. It tends to be additive to the neighborhood. I mean, there's nothing holistically wrong with the Spotswood parcel, but I think we can all agree it's probably not its highest and best use. We try to create a new chapter for that piece of real estate in terms of its relevance to the community. And of course, what we do produces a lot of new taxes, some new jobs, new residents, and new revenues. Our focus, our rallying cry, so to speak, would be more about creating high quality spaces. We've looked at the Spotswood parcel for a long time. There are a lot of pieces of real estate out there, but we like this one because of its connectivity. We think Lexington has so many great things to offer. And this particular site is in a lot of ways a hole in that donut. It's just a few blocks away from many great things. That creates an opportunity for people to work and to play. And really the selling point is not the great product we're going to put there, but in fact that the great product will be located in Lexington. As I talked about before, we're going to design for success. We are a market rate community. So we do not have low-income housing covenants. I know that was a concern by some folks in our last meeting. We focus on studio and one-bedroom units, some with offices. Why does housing matter? And we approach this with the idea of being additive to the goodness of the community. And we find in many of the communities we work in, there's a lack of attractive and affordable housing, and that impacts employers in terms of their recruitment efforts, in terms of the options that people may have. Our goal with the product that we're going to develop here is a maintenance-free loft-style residence. If somebody wants a yard to maintain, we're probably not the right fit. But if they want something that has a commanding view of the city and a proximity and walkability to all sorts of things in a maintenance-free environment, then we'd like to be considered. As we talked about, the site is well positioned, though it's underutilized. The rescue squad building really doesn't have a clear path forward. It's obsolete and deteriorating. The site has some challenges in that it has above ground and underground utilities in all the wrong places, so to speak. What we're talking about is a mid-rise market rate project, potentially constructed in phases, but likely it will be done in one single phase because of the size of the site. And our goal again is to add value. Again, this PowerPoint will be available later, so nobody really needs to take notes. I believe the city has posted this to their website or Facebook page. Here's a couple of the project experiences that we're drawing from our team. This is a very, 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 very rough draft of how the site may lay out. This was done in concept since our city council presentation until now. Before anybody focuses too intently on any particular aspect, please just remember I said it's a very, very, very rough draft. We're likely talking about 2 buildings, though it may end up being one single building. We like the fact in this scenario that the parking is really pulled towards the back to be adjacent with the parking that's to the southeast. We really love the tree line drive aspect of Spotswood Drive, and keeping the bulk of the vistas in terms of the units out that way. It would be a goal of ours. Again, as you can see, putting these 2 buildings and the related parking on the site within the required setbacks, which you can sort of see with the red dash line, is a bit of a challenge, but that's why we have a skilled design team that will become fully engaged should City Council vote this concept forward. When I get to the end, I'll come back to this so we can talk about it and ask questions about it. Again, we have a series of community meetings like this one, 2 more planned at different days and times, so other people can, that may not be available at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to participate. Really, our goal is to answer any questions that you may have and have a good dialogue. So I'm gonna put it back on here. I don't know, I apologize for the ignorant question, but can you see me and this, or can you just see the concept plan?
Just the concept plan.
Okay, well, that's far more attractive than me, but we could probably hear some questions if they're related to the concept plan, and or I could stop sharing my screen and you can see me.
Edwin, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You've got 150 apartments or living facilities. How much are you going to charge me to live in one?
That's a great question that I don't have the answer for yet, sir. That's really a function of the financial model. These would be market rate. If I had to pull a number out of the air, that will make my partners nervous, but I can't see their faces right now, so I could just trudge ahead. I would say 1 bedrooms would probably start in the $1,200 to $1,400 range a month, probably for a small. 2 bedrooms would probably be more closer to $1,800, $1,900 a month.
Okay, this is a question. I assume that you're putting this on for city council and getting input from the peanut gallery here in the town. How much does the city charge for a burial site now? And the reason I mention that is because there was a public meeting. My Elrod made it clear it wasn't a public hearing, but it was a public meeting in the old courthouse about 4.5, 5 years ago. Everyone, and it was attended by a lot of local residents, a bunch of them old geezers like myself, and the almost to the man or woman, it was a talk about using this space as an extension of the cemetery, because there are a lot of old geezers that come back to Lexington to die, and they're looking for a place to be planted. So that was the sense of the group at the time, and that's my sense of understanding at this point. So $350,000 does not seem like a much of money for the city to sell out all of that property. And I think it's important that I know the city probably doesn't want to have responsibility for a cemetery, but that's tough toenails. The community needs it, and the people who move here and are living here need a place to be planted. There was talk of having little plots for ashes to be put in. There was, I think it was propaganda that, oh, that was not a good place to have a cemetery because you couldn't dig. Well, to my knowledge of the man that runs the cemetery, there was no excavation or investigation that why you couldn't put someone 6 feet 1 inch below that surface. So this is my input to why we're doing this. I don't know if you're trying to sell it to the community or the city council, but this needs to be put towards a public hearing, because when they had sort of a public discussion of about 50 people, there was no one interested in selling this for apartments. It looked like it's entirely too big for this little city that we're living in. So that's my input. Leon Johanning.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your feedback. I obviously am not a cemetery developer and can't speak to that. We've brought a proposal forward to the city. It's in their process for consideration. They can decide to move forward or not. They have no obligation to us. They've been certainly courteous and helpful with their process, but city-owned land. So I can't speak to whether or not they want to do a cemetery there or not. The process we followed, anybody can follow. It's publicly held real estate. So we've proposed a concept and a purchase price, but that doesn't mean somebody else couldn't, or somebody else hasn't had an opportunity to for the last so many years. So I don't know who in the market develops cemeteries or a use that you might find more agreeable.
The city owns the cemetery now, and they've got the current deed to the cemetery, and the community up to this point wanted to continue to have a local cemetery instead of some private burial place out in the county.
Let me
So
speak.
that needs to be addressed from the mayor through the city manager for good business practices, and let's move on from there.
Okay. Well, thank you for your comment.
The history of that property is when it was first donated by the people who owned it. It was donated to the cemetery board to be an expansion of the cemetery.
Right.
And after that happened, eventually the cemetery board could not maintain it, so they gave it to the city. And sometime, I think maybe mid-90s, the city pretty much said they wanted to use it for development, not to expand the cemetery. I think a lot of people were hoping it would be used for that. I think that's probably not the direction the city's taking. So that's why this property has always had a lot of talk about use as a cemetery, because the people who donated originally wanted it, that was their donation with the stipulation that it be used for the cemetery. So, but I think, as I said, the city's not going in that direction, so.
Well, that was then, and this is now. So where does the city get its motivation? From a meeting of 6 or 7 people, or input from the community that they live in? The other thing I'll say is Mrs. Umberto Piovana, who was an old girlfriend of mine, gave much to the city. They gave them the library, they gave them the Piovana building,
Right.
and it's been used for several different things, and it's a good enough building to continue to be used.
Right.
And what's the alternative? The city needs to speak to that, not Mr. Gaskin, because he wants to tear it down.
I do have a lot to say, and my thoughts are going to be kind of scattered, so forgive me. And I was told by email that I only have 3 minutes to talk, but I own 2 properties on that little strip of Taylor Street, and so I was hoping to get 6 minutes, like Leslie and them talked about at the January 21st council meeting when they were talking about renaming names of the streets. So I first want to start off. Oh, my name is Jennifer Jarvis, and I live at 208 Taylor Street, and I own 210 Taylor Street as well. I do like that I was able to look up the city council meeting from January 21st, and I was able to see this presentation there. I'm also worried and concerned that these meetings are only held by Zoom. Most of my neighbors are retired and elderly, and I don't know if they have a computer. And my one neighbor is 41 years older than me, and she's tired. But she's raised her children there, and that's what I want to do. And I want to keep things the way they are. But I do like the cemetery. So I'm not done. I got more. So when in 2012, we had a meeting when they were going to do rezoning and things. And also in 2012, that Charlottesville company was going to come in and put those 35 cottages there. So Patty, I wanted to address what you were talking about. It was my understanding that that property was given or deeded or gifted at a reduced rate because it was to extend the cemetery. And I do remember when Spotswood did not go that far, and Taylor Street that I live on now was a dead end street. What the city had told me then, and I think it was John Ellison, he said that once they put Spotswood in there and cut the property, they no longer had to consider it to be cemetery. So I'm strongly for extending the cemetery. Another concern I have is I do have children. Lexington City School does not have school buses. So our children walk to school. And that's for both elementary and middle school. So then you have now 150 potential more vehicle traffic on that road. And as David talked about in the January 7th meeting, I know that that was a concern he had about his kids' safety of going to school when they were talking about passing the machine that does the what is that thing? Radar machine. So David on city council did appreciate that at that time. One of the other questions I have a lot to say. When I saw your presentation, you were talking about, and this is to you, Edwin, that you talked about the cost and you really didn't give a figure. I was thinking it was going to be at least $1,000, but today you're talking anywhere from 12 to 19. I don't know how you're going to get that return on investment. What is going to bring people here? Our hospital does not even have babies anymore. You cannot, you have to go to West Virginia, Roanoke, or Fishersville to have a baby. So what is going to draw people there? What is going to draw people for tourism there when our history is being deleted and changed? Oh, and I will talk a little bit about, remember when I talked about the road being behind there? So that little strip of houses where Taylor Street was a dead end toward Preston Street, all of that was the house that I live in and my neighbors, it was their backyards. And the city came in and did eminent domain and took that property for the greater good of the city. So again, that's a hard pill for people to swallow. And these people that live on my street, most of them have passed, but they, you know, fought it. I don't think they were done very well for that. So that's something I think that needs to be said. And then again, as you were talking, I don't know your name, the man that just spoke with the cemetery.
Leon Johanning.
Leon, I do have that article for when they talked about the memorial gardens, and I do think that that is something that's more needed. And what happened to that idea? And I think Sally was part of that, but she has passed away. So she fought it as long as she could fight it. One of the other concerns I had is when you talk about the rent being that high. I mean, again, who is gonna pay that? I mean, one of the things like with Chuck Smith talked about in the January 7th meeting, he talked about when they were trying to propose the Lex Bucks to stimulate shopping downtown. He alluded to the fact that most people in Lexington can't afford to shop downtown on Main Street. So who are you targeting this for? Another thing is why this property? There's that VDOT property that's 2 blocks away, that's close to the bypass, and they have trees between the bypass. Why not buy from VDOT? Why not put it there? Social services. Their social services needs to be relocated, and they're looking for space. Help them find a place. Take that building, build a couple more stories high on that, because the Robert E. Lee building is 6 stories high. You could probably have more there, then have more single dwellings up there. And I know that Rah-Rah building is old, and I know that it's right on the bus line, and that's what's desirable for this property for you, but it's going to affect a lot of people. So my suggestion, again, social services does want to move, help them find a place and build above there. I think having above buildings in city is awesome. I did the tour of the upstairs, downstairs tour several years ago, and there's lots of gems in Lexington that you don't know about of living places. So that's what I would suggest as well. And also in the city council meeting on the 21st, they did talk about the Robert E. Lee building, which is now called the Gin. That one was full of 1-bedroom apartments, and they all had to be displaced. And that building needs to be renovated as well. But I really think having stuff downtown would be much more desirable for people. And I know it's the goal of the city to sell that property and develop it and not keep it as green space. And see. And I know the proposal was unsolicited, is from the meeting on the 21st, that, but it also concerns me because the Charlottesville operation that came in wanted to look at the Rah-Rah building itself. And that's the only thing they wanted to buy. And city council had said, what about this land beside it? So we need to fight for our green space. We need to keep that as, again, cemetery. I love my cemetery as my neighbors. We have deer that come in there. Also in today's paper, I don't know if anybody saw, I think it's Arvid Christensen. Sorry if I misspelled it, or mispronounced it. But again, $350,000 is not a lot of money for that. And again, this person is in use for a park for that area. Also, yeah, the community table does know they may have a year to move out, but why? Why displace them? So I know I want to talk at the next 2 meetings as well. And I know I probably went over my 6 minutes for my 2 pieces of property. But the next 2 meetings, I want to talk about the comprehensive plan of Lexington City with the green space and the way that things are zoned. And I also want to talk about that newspaper article that I'll have with me then. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And my objective is you and anybody else all to say anything they want to say and get all the questions out there.
Yeah,
A lot of
I have several concerns I'd like to bring up about the proposed project. First of all, as you said, parking is going to be a big factor in limiting it, because I assume you'd have to have a minimum of 150 spaces, and obviously more, because sometimes a couple will each have their own car. And I know I live on Houston Street. I live right across from the medical building. Now that lot in your schematic of the proposed apartment buildings that you showed during the PowerPoint, the lot at the medical building, just to the west side of the medical building, has about 70 or 80 parking spaces. So you're talking about, you know, an area in that space that's easily twice that much to have enough car spaces for all the apartments. I have a hard time seeing how that would fit. I assume you've looked at that. But it also means that entire area is now going to be paved. And so we've got a hard surface. And I can tell you, living on Houston Street, that particularly once the nursing home was built, when it rains hard, Houston Street turns into a river. For a few minutes after a heavy rain, it looks like a river is running down the street. And there's one stormwater drain at the corner of Houston and Taylor. And then that water goes over, and of course that lot is lower than we are topographically. And if you end up paving that entire area, I have serious concerns. If it rains hard, it's going to flood the entire lower part of the cemetery, as well as the houses that are on the western side of Spotswood, because they're all lower than that property is. And if you look at it right now, of course, it's got a big dip that runs down into a drain. And it's hard for me to see, I drove by it again today, how you can configure that without filling that in, particularly with the drawing you showed, and not end up flooding the lower part of the cemetery when it rained. I know you said in the paper when you were quoted that if city council agreed to sell you the property, you would then do the engineering and the things you needed to do to determine what to happen. But it seemed, what would you do with it if you got it and then found out that you could not build what you wanted to build on that because of the flooding problem?
That's a great question. So should city council, who would be fortunate if the city council approves the purchase contract, there will be a lengthy, what we call a due diligence period, where we really do the design and the engineering to vet all those questions. I think you bring up a great question about stormwater. Any modern development, particularly a greenfield development, where it's called impervious surface, requires a very detailed stormwater management plan, both the city and the state approved, and that manages and tries to prevent exactly the effect described of stormwater essentially leaving the site, flowing off the site, and impacting neighboring property. So that's what the engineering team does, is create a stormwater management plan, where the stormwater is either addressed on site or with other infrastructure that should prevent the negative outcome that you just described.
Yeah, and Edwin, I can add on to that. This is Randy Cosby. I'm one of Edwin's partners. The stormwater regulations have changed a lot for the better. You know, they're more stringent now than they were years ago, but we're doing some kind of creative things on another project where stormwater is, of course, treated, you know, on site for the most part. And we've done some underground stormwater detention, which is something that's common in a slightly more urban style of development. and we've even gone as far as to tie the downspouts in from the gutter systems directly into the stormwater system. So there's no concerns of runoff there. So that's something that'll be studied heavily, and it's heavily regulated, not just by the city of Lexington, but by the state and the Army Corps of Engineers, of course.
Because this isn't just the runoff from your property. This is what happens when it rains hard. The runoff from that up here goes to that property and runs down there. When it rains hard, water stands down in there. And plus, when the city developed Brubaker Annex, they used, which is behind Houston Street, they used a storage system, but when it rains hard, the storage system is designed where it overflows down a pipe that also runs to Houston Street and joins the water running down the street. It's always been a huge deal when it rains on Houston Street, how much water comes down the street. The other factor for this property that concerns me is our sewer system in this town is pretty antiquated. When the medical building that's across the street from my house was built, as soon as it went up, everybody on Houston Street had problems with their sewer lines. Everybody had to bring in plumbers. It walked down the street, one house, the next house, the next house. And I'm wondering what's going to happen to the sewer system in that area. This might be more for city council, that when you add another 150 residents onto this sewer system. That's another concern. And the last thing I'd mention would be, in the paper, you were quoted as saying, Mr. Gaskin, that the rents would be such that you didn't think it would be something W&L students would really be interested in. That's not exactly how you said it, but that it wouldn't be appealing to them, I believe. You might want to research a little more about W&L students and what they can afford, or what their parents can afford. A lot of them already pay for not only an on-campus resident, but an off-campus resident. So I'm not sure, even at the rent you quoted, that's not going to stop W&L students from renting apartments there.
No, you bring up a good point. Obviously, like this meeting, at the city council meeting, when I'm being hit with questions, sometimes, I always think about later what I should have said. And, in that case, I think the focus is our targeted market really student housing? And it would not be. Certainly W&L students can afford a number of different rent price points. But from a design perspective, we're not student housing developers. That product tends to be very different than the kind of product we're proposing. We're proposing, generally speaking, a very nice one-bedroom apartment with its own kitchen, its own bathroom. It's really geared towards modern living. Most of the student housing product that you see being developed has 4 or more bedrooms around a central, larger kitchen, shared bathroom setups. And that's really not what we're after at all. So if we can't dissuade them because of the economics, then I guess we have another chance to dissuade that potential student renter because of our design may not be what they're seeking for, given other product that's out there for them.
And I agree with Patty. I think they would be one of the few that could afford it. And also Patty mentioned about the Houston Street parking in that Dr. Sayers' office. And those parking spots are extremely tight. They're actually too small.
Well, you both have touched on items that are heavily regulated. So as we go through a site design process, both for parking layout, stormwater retention, sewer line interface, all of that is essentially calculated and regulated already with existing ordinance. So I can't speak to those specifics right now as to sewer infrastructure, but those are things that will be evaluated. I can't speak to exactly how the parking spots will lay out, but again, that's regulated by city ordinance, and we'll have to comply with that. The same way with stormwater. I can't think of a subject that's more regulated in the development process than stormwater. So I don't know how it addresses the stormwater runoff from an adjacent property onto this property. That's an interesting question that Ms. Higgins brings up. But I'm sure that's part of the calculation for us to factor in.
And why does it have to be so big and so tall? And if I remember correctly, Patty, when they built Dr. Sayer's office, and it's not just him, he's the only one I know in there now. I think that the neighbors were extremely surprised on how tall and how big that building was.
That she's talking about the medical building that's on Houston Street. That was at that time what happened. That property was zoned residential professional. And so they were able to build it without having to go get permission from the planning commission or city council. After that, they rezoned some of the properties on that side of the street that had been zoned residential professional back to just residential. So yes, we had been told the property would be, we'd been given pictures of what it would look like, and it was not anything like this gigantic building that blocked everybody's view of the mountains, that in the middle of a residential section. Nobody's ever been happy about it. And I'll just complete what I had to say by saying I'm concerned about a 4 or particularly 5-story building in essentially, except for that medical building, in the middle of a residential area.
And it does ruin everybody's view.
Edwin, could I ask you 2 questions?
Please.
The first question, what would your standard amount of parking be for number of spots for 150 units?
You want to do both questions or just want me to answer them one at a time?
One at a time or both, whatever you want.
All right, I'll go for one at a time. So again, being owner developers, our concern is long-term viability. Have we built a product that the market appreciates and wants to be a part of? We can talk about spreadsheets and architects and stormwater all day long, but until somebody shows up and wants to live there because they feel it appeals to them enough to be their home, then that's really our objective. Parking weighs into that. If you really look at parking across different markets, you'll find a wide variety of answers to your question. What we have found in this kind of product, that you actually need less parking than you presuppose. If we went in there as if this was a retail strip mall, so to speak, if we were parking a retail center, you'd have multiple spots per 1,000 square feet, so to speak, to accommodate potential customers. In this kind of setting, because we're focused more on studio and 1-bedroom units, we find that one parking space per apartment or less actually functions quite well. We find that traditional parking ratios actually overpark, where you end up having mostly vacant spots and more impervious surface, which contributes, of course, to stormwater runoff and those kinds of issues. So we actually find a well-calibrated parking ratio that relates more towards the types of units that are being developed is the smarter play long-term. We don't find people having or bringing multiple vehicles to a site. And we actually find some that prefer to be vehicle-less. And particularly in a walkable, connected community like is Lexington, there's a strong possibility that a small minority of the tenants or the residents will choose to be vehicle-less. Not the majority, we don't have those delusions, but we do believe there's a possibility that some will just avail themselves of walking or public transportation in the area, or other resources. But we think a 1-to-1 ratio or less would work quite well in this setting. That was a very long-winded answer to a very short question. I hope I didn't dismay you.
That's okay. I mean, I would be concerned though, because while Lexington, if you live in Lexington, you can, walk to town, and there you could walk to Kroger's, but pretty much everybody has a car around here. We're really not an urban, environment. So I really think it has to be at least 1-to-1. And I'd be concerned because then if you don't put enough, where do they go? And so that was the first question. The second question was back to the 150, and I guess you're thinking about 130 being 1-bedroom apartments. have you done any research yet to see that there's the market for that type of makeup, or is this more if you build it, you think they'll come?
No, we're not field of dreams developers. We definitely are quantitatively driven, and even if we weren't, our capital sources would be. We've done some preliminary market research, and we believe our unit mix approach is correct. Also, I can't quote it chapter and verse, but I think the city had commissioned a fairly recent housing study. I've been with Ken Danter's group, which identified housing needs in the area. We've looked at that, and that validates the idea that there is a gap in the Lexington housing spectrum for market rate, professional grade rental housing, particularly, I can't remember the exact number, but it was a couple of hundred units that the market researchers felt the current Lexington environment lacked. So we think we can introduce these units and slake some of that need while not pushing the envelope in terms of pretending like we're fulfilling all of it. Every community needs essentially a housing spectrum where you have opportunities for people to both enter the market and progress along that spectrum. The market study that I'm referring to identified that there's essentially a gap of non-student professional grade market rate housing that would be for people that are in the area more on a transitional basis. They may be here for a couple of years, or they may be here for a couple of years and then choose to buy a house, or they may be permanent renters. There's lots of paths to walk in this world, but when a community lacks those that diversity of options, then particularly employers suffer in their recruitment efforts. So that, again, another long-winded answer to your excellent question.
Okay, I realize what you threw out as a number was a total guess at this stage, that or a total ballpark, but I'd be a little concerned about that number. That's high for a one-bedroom around here. I sell real estate in town, and 1,200 is pretty high, very high for a one-bedroom.
Okay. Well, thank you for recognizing it was a complete guess. So
I understand. I think
not as much as the breath it took to state it. So that's really where we get into that due diligence phase, and we do more market research. This is going to be new construction, so it's going to be more expensive from the outset. And that service needs to be paid, and that comes from income. So, and also we're talking about something that's a year or two plus out, and so we have to factor that into it. Even with the numbers that I threw out there, I don't think I'm far off from the market in terms of what we could get based on our initial research. But we'll see. We'll see.
Thank you.
But I appreciate your feedback. That's excellent points. The floor is open. I'm sure there's other questions or comments or concerns out there. Love to hear them.
So also in the meeting of January 21st, let me see my notes. That you guys said that it's already, the purchase contract is in the hands of the city staff and the city attorney for review. So does these forums even, or these meetings, do they even matter?
Well, of course they do. I mean, there's an established process, not only in Lexington, but in Virginia, to receive an unsolicited proposal from any developer for any publicly owned piece of real estate. So I would say wholeheartedly they matter. We offered to do this because we're proposing to invest in a neighborhood, and we've done this a number of years, as my lack of hair might indicate. And when you are essentially offering to be part of a neighborhood, you're offering to be a neighbor. And so it's important to get to know the neighbors, not only in the easy parts, but also in the difficult parts. And so we want to hear concerns and complaints and criticisms and even compliments when we earn them. There's a way that we need to sort of introduce ourselves to each other. And we hope, even if you don't like what we're proposing, we can respect each other in terms of a process that we're going to follow. And city council can take what we sent and throw it in the trash can, or hear it at their next meeting, or hear it several meetings from now. There is no mandated requirement in terms of timetable or even an outcome. We gave them an unsolicited proposal. They have all the options in the world at this point, including do nothing. And I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't see your hand there, so I will turn it over to Jim.
Mr. Jarvis, I just wanted to note that City Council obviously has not approved this at all. There's been no vote. There's been no discussion of it. So it is wide open. In fact, city staff has a lot of unanswered questions. And until those questions are answered, I would not even recommend it to City Council, because as Mr. Gaskin said, there's just a lot of things we need to explore, not only with our residents, but internally with staff, whether it's parking, stormwater, drainage, utilities. There are some unanswered questions that need to be properly vetted before I could, in any way, shape, or form, tell City Council and the community that this is a good project that we should move forward with. So we're in a preliminary phase of review.
I just worry because this one is worse than the last proposal, because that one had 35 little tiny cottages. Nothing against you, Edwin. But this just seems like it's going to be a giant building in the middle of a nice grassy area, which won't be there anymore.
Well, I don't take it personally. Even if we move forward or not, I mean, this is what makes our country great, is a diversity of opinion.
I definitely like the concept and your idea for next to Roanoke Memorial. I think that would be a perfect place for that. And then you can get young doctors and nurses to come in there, and I could see the need filling there. I just don't see it in Lexington.
If I can offer back kind of a thought, both to your questions and Jim's as well, right now we've presented a concept, and there are questions we can answer about the concept now, but there are questions that are great questions, but we can't answer. A lot of the ones that have been brought up that are really engineering related questions, those we have to pay for, and not a small amount. And so we're willing to do that during our due diligence phase, where once we're under contract, then we would engage the correct professionals to really vet the full plan and come up with the engineering answers. And there may be, I doubt it, but there may be a point that we get our feedback back and from these professionals, and we're like, we can't proceed. We will have spent that money, but the business model just doesn't pencil, because maybe the rents aren't high enough, or the stormwater issues are too Byzantine, or there's not enough parking, or the building is maybe not tall enough, or what have you. There's 1,000 potential failure points. Unfortunately, most of those can't be known at this stage. That's why there is this process where we've proposed a purchase contract that, again, should City Council see fit to approve it, all we've done is buy a ticket to spend a lot more money to determine whether or not this is feasible. But it does them, I guess, endorsing the purchase contract, essentially allows them to endorse the concept. So at this phase, I think we're having the totally appropriate dialogue. Is it too big? Are there too many? Is it the right thing? Should it be a cemetery? Should it be 4 stories or 1 story? That's concept level stuff. And I think we should have that dialogue. And it's really going to be up to City Council whether or not they want that concept or they don't, or some variation on it. Once we get past that, then it's really into the dive deep details on engineering and some of the other very prudent concepts that have been brought up now. We just can't answer those very prudent questions now because it's not the right phase. But back to your question, Ms. Jarvis, I think this process is totally worth it. If for nothing else, that we're hearing all these things, and even if we don't agree with some of them, there may be some other elements that we can incorporate it into the project, so it's better received by the community.
And I think what I worry is, you said it is in the hand of the city council, but what if that's not what the people want?
Well,
And I know that's not something you can answer.
right.
And I guess,
Then we get into the philosophy of representative democracy. I can't touch that one. That's way out of my pay grade. But
and I guess that's for the city council. And I see David, you're on there now. I talked about my kids walking to school and the safety of that earlier. I don't know if you caught that.
No, I'm enjoying the fact that people are participating in our city and the decisions that we have to make. So I'm just taking information in. I am so glad that we are a city that is desirable, where there are companies that want to build multi-million-dollar projects in our city. There are a lot of communities where they're passed over for projects like this, but we're a desirable place. And that's why Mr. Gaskin and his company and his partner are looking in Lexington. I think what the city of Lexington and maybe their leaders or just myself, I certainly know that we have a lot on our plate in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And having one of the higher tax rates that you pay on 2 parcels, that I pay, that a lot of us pay, it's really difficult to continue to go to the property owners and raise taxes and raise water rates 10% or more each year to fix pipes that are over 100 years old. And so we owe it to everyone to expand our tax base. And so if there's a project that could potentially bring in thousands and thousands of dollars in property tax revenue each year, people that would shop at our businesses, eat in our restaurants, we owe it to our property, to our business owners. We owe it to the city and to our future to look at it. So I'm intrigued. I know that you mentioned kids. I have kids. We're going to have to pay millions of dollars to upgrade that high school. And we're going to appreciate if we at some point have an expanded tax base in the city of Lexington. So this is an intriguing piece of property that is underutilized as it is. The cemetery is certainly something that is on a lot of people's minds. As it is now, Oak Grove Cemetery, I believe the taxpayers subsidize it to the tune of almost 6 figures a year that we pay to subsidize that. So I think having a public cemetery is not what a lot of cities and communities are going out and developing because they are not money makers necessarily. And they take from the tax base. I think what's really important also though is we've got the community table in Rara and they've been engaged. They don't have to like the fact that they might be moving, but from their statements, I think it's, I appreciate personally that they understand this. It's been signaled by the city for well over a decade that this piece of property could be developed. It's been in the comp plan that it could be, the proposal that was talked about from whether it's 2012. This is something that has been out there. And so an unsolicited offer came and city council owes it to everyone to listen. And I appreciate that there are 3 forums and there's been maybe 4 or 5 folks that have spoken today. Hopefully dozens of people participate and listen and ask questions. And I know that none of us like Zoom meetings, but I'm glad to see the folks that are on it today. So that's just my 2 cents. As far as that neighborhood, I lived on Houston Street. It's a wonderful street. It's a wonderful area. And I hope that if we partner with Mr. Gaskin and his partners, that we'll be able to, that the devil is in the details and we're not going to approve something that completely detracts from the community and the city that we live in, that we all love.
And I do agree with a lot of your statements that we do need the revenue to come in, but why that spot? And
That's a great question. So,
I wish
so
I
the
had
VDOT
this
property,
in color,
the-
but
so-
you know, there's not a lot of green space. And I know when they did behind Liber and Downing, they filled that full of houses as well. But you were going to talk about VDOT. Tell me about that.
well, I mean, Jim, our city manager could certainly speak to that. The VDOT property is something that the city is looking at, continues to look at. It's a piece of property that could require significant infrastructure upgrades. And it's not as desirable to developers, but that's why this is an unsolicited bid on or offer, if you will, on this piece of property. But I can, you know, we can speak about the VDOT property, or Jim can speak about it. But I mean, this meeting is truly, to put cards on the table, is Mr. Gaskin coming forward with his proposal for this piece of property and wanting to hear from folks about it.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Sigler. Just 2 points. One, you're right. None of us like Zoom, particularly introverts like me. But what I do like about Zoom is I'd much rather have this kind of dialogue where you can see people face to face. People seem to have more of a, you know, I've done so many public meetings where I'm at a lectern facing elected officials and the public's behind you. And I never feel like the public really gets that chance to sort of engage with the developers. So I'm starting to warm up to these kinds of meetings, because at least people can, you know, have their voices heard, maybe a bit more than what they would in a for more of a formal Robert's Rules of Order kind of meeting. So I'm appreciative of that. Second point I want to bring up is that in a variety of ways, we have introduced new developments into other neighborhoods in a variety of ways. Some new construction, a lot of historic rehab. In every case, there was a change. There was a change of what it was before to what it became. And in that process, there was always concern, even fear, and sometimes contention. But that's part of the lives we lead and the journeys we walk. That's part of the reasons I want these processes to be collaborative, because we don't know all the answers, and we want to hear things about folks that have lived on the streets and seen it flood, and worries about the sewer connections. Those are all things we want to know so we can make fewer mistakes. But my point is that I think, in trying to remember if there's any derailments of this, but in every case, all of our projects, we're proud to say we've been additive to the community. Even former critics, people that you know pugnaciously protested what we were trying to do. Many of those, I can't think of an exception, came around and liked the product that we produced. You know, I can understand that folks go, well, 4-story, 150 apartments, you know, that doesn't sound like we're curing cancer or saving the baby seals or anything. And it's not. I mean, let's just take it for what it is. But is it a worthwhile development? And is it a worthwhile development there? I think those are two questions that together we need to answer. It's not going to be all things to all people. And that's frankly why the purchase price proposal is what it is. That's what it's worth to us for this product. If it were fewer units, then it would be worth less. Or if it was a different concept, it would be worth more. So it's really not intended to insult anybody or say that the land is less worthwhile, but inside of our business model that we're proposing, that's what it's worth to us. So I just wanted that put out there so people didn't think that it couldn't be worth more to them if they were proposing something different. Again, we don't have all the answers, but these meetings and the next ones and the many ones after that and all the conversations we'll have along the way are intended to help us get those answers so we have a positive outcome for everybody.
So again, it's just the location that I have a problem with. And, you know, I don't even know the history of VDOT, but that area, but it's, you know, closer to the pool, closer to the park. I don't know.
Ms. Jarvis,
I just don't want it in my backyard.
We did, I can't, I don't have the file in front of me, but we did spend some time looking at the VDOT site. And there's two dissuasive factors. Well, there's a few dissuasive factors. One, it's still owned by VDOT. Two, there's some former uses on there that give a little pause. that have to be navigated. And
Like
our,
with the school parking lot thing?
I'm just talking about a former, vehicle maintenance facility, some environmental legacy issues there.
Gotcha.
Not so concerned about the area. I think we think it's a fine area, but our investigations did determine that there's significant infrastructure upgrades that would have to happen for that site to be viable. In terms of sewer, there were no easy solutions there. So we think it's a viable redevelopment site. It's just probably a longer term horizon for that to find its next chapter, if you will. There's a lot of public infrastructure. And I'm not just talking right around the site. I'm talking leading up to it and going away from it that would have to be upgraded. Lexington is an amazing place, but it also is old. And a lot of that infrastructure is pretty old, and none of it's cheap to upgrade. And there really has to be a compelling reason to do so, because, city council has always tough decisions to make and where to spend that dollar. And to make those investments in public infrastructure, I don't envy the job, because you have to be so strategic about where to spend those precious funds so they have the right outcomes.
And it worries me, you say that Lexington is old. My houses are old. One's in the 30s and one's in the 60s, but I love them and I love my area and I want to raise my kids and my grandkids there. I mean, I would buy more houses on that street if I could, but everybody's holding on to them.
Old is not a pejorative in my vocabulary. I think that's part of the appeal. We've done a lot of historic property developments, and we to underscore something that Councilman Sigler said, Lexington is special in that you don't have many markets in this part of the state that would even justify market rate new construction. Okay, this is an important point. Like, if we were talking about Northern Virginia, this would be no-brainer business model, dust it off and go. But we're in another part of Virginia where new construction costs so much more than historic rehab. So the business model has to be robust enough to survive that difference. And we think Lexington is one of the few places, knock on wood, that it will. And that speaks to the quality and caliber of the market, which is just a fancy word for the wonderful people that live there. So Lexington is special in many ways. And the reason we're there and proposing this as a financial capital venture is that we think the market forces can support it.
I have a question for David or Jim. Obviously, this is very early in the process. It's going to be a lot of these meetings and other city council type things and public meetings. But part of what David said, and I think is why this is being considered, is increasing the tax base for Lexington and to help with those of us out who live here in town on that front. At some point, are you going to have a number and answer for us of how much you think it will increase the tax base to help us decide if it's worthy?
Yes, completely. Yes. I mean, we owe it to ourselves, certainly, to say what we think this could generate. We did a similar project, study with Kendall as they expanded. That would yield to us long term. And we brought up our schools. We love our schools here locally. And as we expanded the tax base at Kendall, one of the things that we looked at was, hey, this is great. Property tax revenue, car tax revenue, sales tax revenue, the whole 9 yards. And they're not necessarily going to overfill our schools. We like our size of our schools. So you want to be cautious that you don't overbuild and cause yourself a problem that next thing you know, you have 24 kids in a classroom. My kids love being there with 16, 17 kids in a classroom. So we would look at everything, and we will. And I think that our finance director has been crunching numbers conservatively, but we owe it to everyone to get better numbers, to even understand if there are infrastructure improvements at that site. And if there are improvements needed at that site, are those improvements needed anyway for that whole area? just as we heard from Patty, there is an issue there with stormwater management. There could be an issue with sewer, et cetera. And are those on our roadmap already that need to be fixed and are going to be programmed anyway in the future? And does this give us a reason to do them now? I mean, we're certainly, in my mind, if we go down this path and we take the deal, respectfully, it's not for the $350,000 that we're being offered. Not at all. That money will be spent, too quickly. But it's for what this will provide 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And when I think of any project that way, every year that I delay doing something, I'm costing the city of Lexington and all of you taxpayers money. Every year that you and I waited to buy Tesla, we lost out. Apple, if there's a project that can benefit the city of Lexington, we owe it to all of us to study it and see if it works for us. And honestly, this was not something where we recruited Mr. Gaskin. We knew he was already interested in New Lexington because of the water tower. This surprised me that this proposal came forward, to be quite honest. So, I mean, I'll put that out there. And I've been on council 6 years. So I'll just share that.
So those are numbers you're starting to crunch now and that you'll be presenting to the public as we get further into this proposal?
I mean, I don't want to speak for the city manager or finance department, but yes, those numbers will be shared, studied, questioned, and that's fair question. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And to supplement that, Tom, we by nature, our team is very collaborative. We work with municipalities all the time, and we expect to pay taxes. I mean, that's part of the rationale for this. And as we have more detailed financial models and then later appraisals and things like that, we'll work with the city to make sure they have updated information so we can proudly say, what we project to pay in terms of fiscal benefit to the city. Those numbers will evolve over time as we have more information, but that's not stuff we keep secret. We think that's part of the reason for doing these things.
Right.
A lot of us can remember when the hotel on Main Street, the Gin, was apartments, and that the city and the developers, they took the leap of faith and so there were some incentives to redevelop that structure. Heck, there were also leaps of faith to redevelop the old bank building where Hessen Company is now. And I mean, there's a lot of exciting things that have happened on Main Street that the numbers worked out that they're beneficial to the city. This is obviously a little bit different because to a lot of us, we can't put a price on green space. There's not more of it within our 2.5 square miles of the city of Lexington. We're fortunate with the parks that we have. Our comp plan prioritizes green space, green infrastructure. We talk about it, and so it's an incredible priority. So this all will be taken into consideration from where I'm sitting anyway.
Let me throw out there, probably more to city council folks, David, than Mr. Gaskin is. And I realize the statements rah-rah made about realizing they would have to leave were very gracious. But given all the good that the food pantry and the community table do, I feel like that building, it might be getting old, but to have a building like that is a real amenity for a city. People vote there, there's community meetings there, and then these two great organizations that use it. And I do have concerns about them having to move and find appropriate spaces. And, I just hope that's in the back of everybody's mind too, because they're such great organizations.
I think those two organizations are so intertwined with our city and our county, and the leaders of those organizations and the users of those organizations, we know them. They're our friends and they're our neighbors, and so it's on all of our minds what we're going to do, and that we hope that we can find a landing spot for both organizations. I think that one of the concerns as a city council member is though, that structure. Is it even, they've modified it over time to work for them, but it certainly wasn't built for either organization, and it is deteriorating. And the longer that we allow it to deteriorate, we're talking, new roofs and HVAC and the whole 9 yards. And I think the community table, and this doesn't matter, and I'm not saying that it does, but I think the maximum they pay in rent is $249 a month, and the minimum is $83 a month based on the number of days they use it. So it, and that doesn't begin to cover what the taxpayers pay for that facility in utilities and water and so on. And RARA pays more than that, but we're going to be staring down the fact that we're going to have to put thousands of dollars into that facility when City Hall could use the investment of thousands of dollars. City Hall needs work and so on. And so owning facilities, as I think I've heard the mayor say, I don't like to quote Frank very often, but now just kidding, but it's hard being a landlord. It's difficult to be a landlord, and the city of Lexington, we're not good at being a landlord, probably. And so what we should do is do something that allows our residents to maybe have lower taxes, bring in folks to the city. And it seems like Mr. Gaskin's project, unsolicited, is the one that we're looking at right now. It's a challenge. I think, Ms. Jarvis, I've never met you. I mean, I totally get it that to say, I really don't want this in my backyard. I mean, I think we dealt with that again, a very similar situation with Kendall. The vast majority of city residents said, are you kidding me? What's the big deal about a whole bunch, 60 more retirees moving to Lexington? This is a phenomenal project. Why would we ever not let Kendall build 30 cottages and then welcome 60 more residents that want to be here, that maybe have means to spend money? But the fact of the matter is, it really changed the nature of that neighborhood. And that was the challenge. And that's what the challenge is with this project. It changes the nature of the neighborhood. Fact.
And again, I just, worry about my kids walking to school, which eventually they're going to be older, but still.
Well, Ms. Jarvis, I have 4 kids of my own, and while I don't live there, I understand the paramount nature of that concern. Certainly nothing we do, we would ever want to be a negative effect on a perception or reality of family well-being in the neighborhood. So that's always number one in my book. Well, we don't have to wrap up, but I don't want to waste anybody's time. Certainly, it's an open forum. Is there anybody else that has anything they'd like to ask or share?
Now, next one, I want to look at the comprehensive plan. So I might have more to say at the next one.
Wonderful. We'll try to anticipate some of those questions so we could be maybe a little bit more prepared for any sort of zoning related question and such. But again, we won't even, we need to keep your expectations low. We won't have those answers completely, but we'll have maybe some thoughts on how we might proceed, because we definitely will have to tweak a few things to allow for this concept at that site. So, well, to everybody, thank you. Again, not trying to rush you off or anything, but any roundtable thoughts or questions that want to be asked? All right, well then, please have a great rest of your day with our thanks, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.